person who's going to kick off the program today is Eric Sapirstein of ENS Resources. Eric is somebody who helps provide guidance to the Bay Planning Coalition in terms of our strategic planning in Washington, D.C. Eric, ENS Resources is also a member. I would highly encourage anybody who is looking for advocacy issues in Washington to reach out to Eric. He has done a phenomenal job for us in terms of guiding us on where we need to go, because he does not provide advocacy for us, but he provides guidance and how we go forward. Eric's a good friend, and with that, I'd like to turn it over to Eric Sapirstein.
Well, thank you, John, and good morning, everybody. As always, it's great to be here. Interesting times in Washington, and I am here to give you some optimistic news as opposed to the past couple of times I've been here where it's sort of been up in the air. There are a number of things going on, and let me just get this, see if this works. So today I'm going to give you a quick download, if you will, on what I think is going on of issues of interest to the Bay Planning Coalition. I call it the 114th Congress. We're in the home stretch. And the issues that I want to quickly go over are WRDA 2016, the appropriations process, because that carries with it a lot of monumental decisions that will affect each and every one of you. And then I just want to turn quickly to water infrastructure, because you folks, well, water infrastructure captures a lot of different things. It has an impact on what you do every day in the Bay Area. So let me first say that the most timely matter is WRDA 2016. And before I go forward with that, let me sort of give a shout out, if you will, to a couple of folks that have made WRDA 2016 important for you. Of course, BPC, the Coastal Conservancy, the BCDC, the Bay Institute, and Save the Bay all work collaboratively together on some very important issues that are now in WRDA 2016 in the Senate bill, and we're hopeful that it will be some element of what I will talk about in a few minutes will be in the House version of WRDA 2016. Let me also suggest to you that for those of you who are jaded, and for those of you who are despondent over the presidential election and what's happening there, there is the political will to move a WRDA this year. Both the House and Senate leadership on WRDA issues have said that they would like to see this bill to the president's desk before he leaves office in January. And I think that will happen. Although everybody said Donald Trump wouldn't be the nominee also. Okay, so let's go forward and let's look at WRDA 2016, because that's really the issue that is of importance to you folks. First of all, we have a kitchen sink approach or a pamphlet approach. And by that, I mean the Senate bill is being referred to as everything but the kitchen sink. The House bill, the chairman of the committee, Bill Schuster, has said he would like to do a pamphlet approach. Pamphlet approach meaning that we're just going to look at WRDA 2014 and do some cleanup activities, and we're not going to do a lot of expansive amendments to WRDA. For our purposes, and I mentioned the collaboration between the various groups, we now have a very strong possibility of seeing beneficial use of dredge materials becoming part of the WRDA mandate going forward. We also see in WRDA 2016 a renewed and increased focus on doing things to address resiliency and sea level change. And finally, we're seeing more of a recognition that if we're going to get things done when it comes to the Corps of Engineers, and I don't mean this as a negative to the Corps, we're going to have to rely more heavily on non-federal involvement in the form of both planning, design, and construction activities, and most importantly, non-federal funding. And I think that that's what we're looking at with WRDA 2016 at the end of the process. I mentioned the pamphlet approach. At the end of the day, well, the House Chairman, Bill Schuster, wants to limit the bill. When they go into conference with the Senate, and that will probably happen sometime in the lame duck session of Congress, I find it very difficult to see that they're going to get it done before the congressional and presidential elections in November. I think at that point, he will have the ability to move forward and expand the WRDA bill from his perspective and probably come closer to a Senate approach, which is the kitchen sink approach. And I'll get into the details of that in a second. But again, whether it is a limited bill or it is a comprehensive and expansive approach, the will is there, and I do think we'll see legislation go to the president's desk. Okay, so I mentioned the great collaboration that the groups did here in California with the Senate Word a Bill. I have to say up front, Senator Barbara Boxer is the ranking member of the Committee on Environment and Public Works, led the way for the Bay Planning Coalition and others. And what we have today from a priority perspective for this group is language, several provisions in the Senate bill, that's S-2848, that essentially says that dredge materials can be used for beneficial uses. Now, there are a couple of kickers there, and one of them is that they have to meet water quality standards. That's good. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it adds a dimension to what kind of dredge materials can be used for beneficial use. There are provisions for special rules unrelated to what the coalition was trying to do, but basically provisions that say that you can go forward and use beneficial use, but there's cost sharing involved for certain types of activities. That's in there. There's a mandate that non-federal funds be used to dispose of the materials. And most important, and something that the coalition and its partners can take credit for, is a priority that dredge materials can be used for the following projects. If they enhance flood protection from sea level rise or storm events, they contribute to shoreline resiliency, that it's in the public interest, and the costs remain reasonable associated with the environmental flood and resiliency benefits. I won't say it's a low bar, but it certainly isn't a high bar to get to a point where you can use the dredge materials in such a manner. So while we don't have a House bill that we can point to, I want to suggest to you that Congress, both the House, Senate, Democrat, Republican, all share the same frustration that you folks do, which is that the Corps has been unable to move forward on beneficial use of dredge materials, in large measure because the rule books prevent it from happening easily. So I think that the timing is great to see that this actually becomes part of the rule book, if you will, for the Corps in deciding how to use dredge materials. Now, nothing in life is ever perfect or I would be out of a job. So what's going on right now is that the Bay Planning Coalition and its partners are working with the Senator Boxer, with the House members of the California delegation on the committee. That would be John Garamendi, Jeff Denham, Grace Napolitano, Jared Huffman, to try and figure out how to revise the language and make certain that it essentially meets the needs of this community. And some of the key issues are going to be to ensure that if you do a beneficial reuse project, that the costs are not saddled on the locals, but that they are incorporated as part of the operation and maintenance of any kind of project. And then secondly, to ensure that there is a timeline, that this doesn't get drawn out, that they actually, at the Corps, move forward and do these projects. And a lot of the effort will be vested in a sort of non-discretionary mandate to the Secretary of the Corps. So hopefully that comes to pass. So let me turn in the brief time I have to fiscal year 2017 funding. The reason I want to talk about that very quickly is that the Bay Planning Coalition and others in the last cycle of Word of 2014 worked very hard to make certain that as much money as possible would be used from the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund for the explicit purposes it was designed to promote and support. What we're seeing this year is moving forward on the appropriations process, strong support to follow through and fund the Corps as much as the highest level as possible. What we're seeing is, one, that the House and Senate budgets are completed in the sense of committed to increasing funding for the Corps' activities. That's important because it reverses the administration's proposed budget that would have imposed some cuts on the Corps' construction budget as well as its operation budget. And at the end of the day, we're going to see, I think, some new starts authorized, which is important because of this era of anti-earmarks. Congress is slowly moving towards a decision and a recognition that you have to do more. And so Word of 2014, which had provisions for the Corps to report on projects that it deemed deserved attention and funding, is coming to be a fact and is moving projects to the funding stage that currently have not been funded. So that's all very, very helpful. Just for a quick snapshot, the Senate is providing $6 billion to the Corps for overall activities. The House similarly is providing $6.2 billion or $4.6 billion, a difference of about $1.5 billion. I think that'll be fixed in conference and be closer to the Senate number. And that compares with the administration request, where the administration was seeking to reduce the funding down to about 4.6 overall, of which only 1.2 billion would be for construction and 2.9 for O&M. And that's basically being rejected. By example, in comparison, last cycle, the current budget year we're in, Congress provided almost $6 billion overall for the Corps, of which $3 billion was for O&M and almost $2 billion for construction. So you can see that notwithstanding what the green eye shades are saying in OMB, Congress is not accepting budget cuts on the Corps. So I think that's all good for activities relative to WRDA projects. I just want to turn now to infrastructure, because as I said, you're inextricably linked in what you do on a daily basis to the commitment to water infrastructure in general. Two things are going on. First of all, we've got an energy bill going through the Senate and the House as we speak. That's another piece of legislation that could actually go to the President's desk before the end of his term. It's important because there's an emphasis on developing innovative solutions to do energy efficiency connected to the use of water that could be helpful in core projects. Second of all, financing innovation continues to be a priority. It's in the WRDA bill in the Senate. A whole bunch of different programs ranging from innovation for stormwater controls and grants assistance to deal with stormwater to promote conservation of water, to just new innovative loan programs to support the construction of infrastructure projects is in the Senate WRDA bill. I remember I mentioned the kitchen sink approach. That's what we're looking at in the Senate bill. And then finally, the emphasis or return to grants assistance. I say stormwater, but we're seeing an increasing focus on figuring out how to provide grants on a limited basis as opposed to just loans. And I think that really sort of puts in place a positive outlook on how we're looking at water infrastructure from a sort of global perspective in Washington. And the days, I think, of we're just going to ignore water infrastructure, we're not going to pay attention, whether it's Flint, Michigan, or the fact that economic competitiveness is sort of undermined by the lack of adequate water infrastructure and efficient water infrastructure, and the issue of energy efficiency as it relates to water infrastructure is coming to a point where Congress is focusing on that. So I'm looking forward to seeing issues of water infrastructure dominate the WRDA bill as it's finalized with the House and the Senate Conference Committee later this fall. So if we had to look at the WRDA outlook, sort of wrap up, I put those two faces up there because as much as I said at the beginning there's political will to do something on WRDA and get it to the President's desk, who knows what's going to happen in the presidential election cycle and whether that's going to freeze the legislative process at the end of the day. I don't think it will, but you can't discount what this election cycle may bring. It's brought surprises, obviously, already. But I will say two things. One is that the cost of the legislation is not going to be a factor. Congress has figured out a way how to pay for all the new spending in WRDA 2016 through offsets in other programs. The administration views, it's the end of an election, the end of an administration. They'll have some say, but I think Congress will basically call the shots on this one. And then finally, with the focus of the legislation, as I said earlier, we have the kitchen sink, the pamphlet approach. At the end of the day, I'm looking forward to a much more expansive WRDA 2016, including provisions to provide for the beneficial use of dredge materials, something that you folks hold near and dear. Last slide. Okay, I don't know if you can see this very well, but as of 2 days ago, Charlie Cook, who is a prognosticator extraordinaire, although he did say 4 months ago that he would guarantee the Republican nominee would be Cuban and 44 or 45 years of age. He was wrong about that. However, I don't think he's wrong. I don't know if you can see the chart very well, but what Charlie Cook is saying is as of a couple of days ago with Donald Trump gaining the nomination, the presumed nominee, the Electoral College has dramatically shifted. So going back to John's clicker as far as who do you think is going to be president of the United States. Charlie Cook is showing that from an electoral college standpoint, the almost formal adoption of Donald Trump as a Republican nominee has managed to push every state almost into the Democratic column that was sort of a toss-up or a lean situation, more to a lean Democratic or strong Democratic circumstance, with the exception of Maine. Maine seems to be still trending towards the Republican nomination, Republican nominee. So I will end by saying, as much as everybody voted on who they thought would be the president, there's an old saying, as Maine goes, so goes the country. So maybe we'll see Donald Trump as president, and we'll see what happens in November. But anyway, thank you very much, and I look forward to answering any questions anybody has during the course of the day. Thank you.